The massive swells were smashing against the vessel, tossing the 33-man crew all about the bridge and galley. When they departed Jacksonville, Florida, Joaquin was only a tropical storm. But now, 2 days later, they were headed directly into the eye of a Category 3 hurricane. The wind was whipping at almost 100 miles an hour, throwing waves of up to 40 feet onto the deck. The vessel and her crew were getting absolutely hammered by the intense storm. You've seen the videos and the photos of the aftermath of hurricanes on land, maybe even lived through one. But have you ever been offshore, at the mercy of the wind and sea? Maybe the movie The Perfect Storm comes to mind. Maybe you have your own experiences. Whatever it may be, all we have is an idea of what it would be like. These guys didn't need an imagination. They were in it, almost in the direct eye of Joaquin. The storm continued battering the vessel until it began taking on water. This left the crew with a huge uphill battle. They were being tossed around with the waves, doing their best to keep a handle on the situation. Despite all odds, they were able to somewhat keep the flood contained, but the ship had already listed about 15 degrees. At 6:54 a.m. on October 1st of 2015, the captain took a call and described the current situation that they were in. Quote, "It's miserable right now. Everybody's safe right now. We're not going to abandon ship. We're going to stay with the ship. We are in dire straits right now. There's no need to ring the general alarm yet. We're not abandoning ship." Captain Michael Davidson was adamant they were not going to abandon the ship just yet. But with the intensity of the storm bearing down on him and the water filling up the cargo holds, soon he would have no other choice. I'm Bradley Hall, and you're listening to episode 12 of Beyond the Harbor. Before the cargo ship was ready to set course for Puerto Rico on September 29th, El Faro was scheduled for a major retrofit. This voyage was set to be the last one before the overhaul. The vessel boilers were found to be severely deteriorated and had several leaks going on in the hull. To some former crew members who sailed aboard the vessel, they thought of the ship as an old rust bucket that was not even supposed to be on the water. To me, I wouldn't be too excited to be on such a ship with the issues that they were seeing. Nevertheless, the ship had just passed its annual inspection a few months prior in March. Even though I would have my concerns, the ship did meet the stability criteria when they departed Jacksonville. Meanwhile, out in the Atlantic, a strong storm was gaining momentum. The ship's master, Captain Michael Davidson, knew this, and so he charted a course that would take them a reasonably safe distance away from the hurricane. El Faro was loaded down with 391 shipping containers and 294 trailers. Accompanying the payload was 33 crew members, with the majority of them from the U.S. The routing company known as Tote could have advised the captain to chart a different route. However, they declined and opted for the ship to continue on its designated course. Though the captain was confident in the course and the ship's ability to navigate it, not all crew members were on board with the idea. Stephen Schultz was a 54-year-old sailing veteran and the chief mate on the El Faro. He and Davidson were watching the storm strengthen while they were charting their path. Schultz mentioned the possibility of passing to the north side of the storm, but all of the models were indicating the storm was going to make a turn to the north, so that wasn't an option. The captain and chief mate analyzed the data coming in, and they decided it best to make a slight right turn with a new heading of 140 degrees. The new heading would carry them about 10 miles outside of San Salvador Island, and by their calculations, at least 50 miles from the eye of the storm. To me, 50 miles still seems a bit too close for comfort, but these men were confident in their plan. Davidson fired off an email to John Lawrence, who was the ship's designated person on shore. He also copied several other managers on the email. He wrote, "Question. I would like to transit to the Old Bahama Channel on our return northbound leg to Jacksonville, Florida. This route adds an additional 160 nautical miles to the route for a total of 1,261 nautical miles, We will need to make around 21 knots for our scheduled October 5th, 10:45 arrival time. This precaution will take the uncertainty out of Joaquin's forecasted track, and as you can see, she really develops into a formidable weather pattern on October 3rd to the 5th. I'm confident that Joaquin will track in a northerly direction once reaching the Gulf Stream. I will await your reply before transiting Old Bahama Channel on our return leg to Jacksonville. Should you have any questions or concerns, kindly contact this vessel. Best regards. Feeling confident in their calculations and readjustment, the pair then headed off to bed. By the next morning, third mate Jeremy Richmond was examining their route closely in relation to the approaching storm. He was in for relief of Davidson. He didn't feel the new heading was going to provide enough margin away from the eye of the storm, and instead were going to head directly into it. This feeling he had seemed to be echoed by more crew members aboard. Second mate, 34-year-old Danielle Randolph, wrote in an email to her friend and said, quote, "There is a hurricane out here, and we are heading straight into it." It seemed Randolph had the same concerns as I did when I was first reading about this story. I'm sure others possibly thought the same thing, as they were sailing in, and I quote, "a rust bucket." The second mate was raised in a military family, so she was no stranger to hard work and getting her job done. She had a strong exchange with a fellow crewmate as she was looking at their route in relation to the incoming hurricane. In a sailor-like colorful way, she said they were going to pass right through the eye. Picking up the house phone, she dialed up the captain's quarters to express her concerns. She informed him that it was now a Category 3 hurricane and proposed an escape route to the south. He immediately rejected her suggestion and went back to sleep, seemingly bothered and unconcerned. Just as the second mate was getting ready to retire to her quarters, a massive wave smashed into the ship. "Hello, Joaquin," she said. The storm continued to ramp up off in the distance as El Faro continued on its route to Puerto Rico. Scans in the area revealed they were alone. Every other ship had diverted course to avoid the storm. At 3:34 a.m., the captain came out of his quarters to relieve the second mate. He announced to everyone, "There's nothing bad about this ride. I was sleeping like a baby. This is every day in Alaska. This is what it's like." However, this was not a typical day. In actuality, they were heading directly into the eye of Joaquin. The course alarm was now blaring, alerting the crew to a deviation from the programmed route. The seas and wind were tossing the vessel around, and there wasn't much they could do at this point but ride it out. Captain Davidson ordered the alarms to be silenced and to turn off the autopiloting system. They were just going to have to navigate the ship manually, hopefully working with the waves than against. The shipping containers were breaking free from their chains as the waves crashed over the railings. Chaos was ensuing, but it was only going to get worse for the crew on board. The ship began to list hard to the starboard side, possibly due to shifting freight containers in the lower cargo holds. With the ship now being tossed around in the ocean, far off axis, the engines were struggling to get the oil they needed. Without the engines, the El Faro would for sure be lost. The captain had to do everything in his power to get the ship back upright. The list was making it difficult just to stand up while they were being slammed back and forth. As he held tightly to his seat, Chief Mate Schultz noticed the barometer had dropped significantly. This indicated they were nearing the eye of the hurricane. He deducted that the El Faro's list was about 18 degrees. Now, it's not my intention to place any blame here, but the question everyone wants to know is why in the world would Captain Davidson continue heading toward the eye of the hurricane? As he was checking the Bond Voyage system, which was an online weather forecasting tool, his concerns seemed to grow. Not because he realized they were almost to the eye of the storm, but because the storm was still much further to the north according to his radar. Unbeknownst to him at the time, the BVS forecast he was looking at was up to 12 hours behind. So the storm he was seeing on paper wasn't the storm he was now up against. One of the engineers down below sprinted up to the bridge to reason with the captain. "I've never seen it list like this. It's too steep to be just from sliding shipping containers." End quote. Something else had to be going on. Something bad. Now 5:43 a.m., the captain took a phone call from one of the crewmates that indicated suspicions of flooding in the number 3 cargo hold. He sent the chief mate Schultz to further investigate the situation. He was tasked with pumping out the water in the hold to help stabilize the ship. "Watch your step. Go down the 3 hold and start pumping water right now." A few minutes later, after working his way down to the cargo hold, Schultz radioed back to the bridge that the water was about knee-deep. It was at this moment when Davidson realized as to why he hadn't been able to correct the steep list the ship was in. He instructed the helmsman, Frank Ham, to steer the ship into the wind to try and correct the tilt. "Put your rudder left 20, he said. "Left 20, the helmsman replied. The plan worked. The list switched from starboard to port and allowed the water to escape out of the open scuttle. Schultz was able to get the scuttle closed, but the list to port side now was very steep. Something else had to be the culprit. And that's when it happened. At 6:13 a.m., the roar of the engines firing had ceased. The El Faro was a sitting duck in the middle of a raging hurricane. The silence of the engines was deafening, even with the heavy rain and waves crashing against the vessel. "I think we just lost the plant," Davidson said. "It's an improbable scenario to right the ship without the help of the engines. Not even the best captain in the world would have a shot at success under these conditions." Schultz had managed to begin pumping out thousands of gallons of water from the holds below. A slight glimmer of hope, given the circumstances. The captain mistakenly believed they were now on the backside of the hurricane, but in actuality, they were in the northern wall and getting pushed to the southwest. And Joaquin was continuing to ramp up, headed for Category 4. Now 7 a.m., Davidson made a call on the satellite phone to the shipping company. Quote, "We had a hull breach. A scuttle blew open during the storm. We have water down in 3 hold with a heavy list. We've lost the main propulsion unit. The engineers cannot get it going. Please patch me through to a towed official immediately." After a brief back and forth and exchange of details, the captain began to explain the dire situation they were in. "The clock is ticking. This is a marine emergency, and I'm trying to also notify management." Everyone on the bridge was eagerly awaiting for management to respond. The seconds probably felt like hours to them, as their calves burned from standing on the tilted ship. The satellite phone finally rang. "Hello. Yeah, I'm real good. 3 hold's got a considerable amount of water in it. We have a very, very healthy port list. The engineers cannot get lube oil pressure on the plant. Therefore, we've got no main engine. And let me give you a latitude and longitude. I just wanted to give you a heads up before I push that button." He was referring to the ship security alert system, which was a distress emergency beacon. He handed the beacon to second mate Randolph, who was awake and now back on the bridge by this point. "The crew is safe. Right now we're trying to save the ship, but it's not getting any better. No one's panicking. Our safest bet is to stay with the ship during this particular time. The weather is ferocious out here. I want to wake everybody up, and I wanted to give you that courtesy, so you wouldn't be blindsided by it. Everybody's safe right now. We're in survival mode." After hanging up with his boss, he turned to Randolph and instructed her to press the button. At 7:07 a.m., the distress beacon was engaged and was pinging an SOS message at their location. "Wake everybody up! Wake 'em up!" Davidson shouted. It's hard to believe that some of the crew was actually sleeping through this storm, and it's true that we don't know that for sure. What I will say is the best sleep I've ever gotten has been at sea, with the rocking of the waves. Granted, these people were sleeping through 40-foot swells. Maybe some of them had already been awake. At 7:15 a.m., Schultz returned from the 3 hold where the flooding was. He said the water level was in fact rising. Davidson asked if he could tell where the water was coming in from. Schultz said it appeared that something had ruptured the main fire line. There was nothing more he could do at this point but evacuate the hold. 7:30 was soon approaching, and it appeared there was no hope to correct the ship's flooding and heavy list. The El Faro was almost in the direct eye of Hurricane Joaquin, taking on winds in excess of 100 miles per hour. The full force of Mother Nature was raging, and there was simply nothing left they could do. Staring into the eyes of defeat, the captain made the call. "Ring it!" he shouted. The screech of the abandoned ship alarm echoed throughout the vessel. Davidson wanted everyone accounted for and to put on their safety immersion suits. The ship's list continued to worsen as the water level in the holds rose, making it almost impossible to stand. And just then, looking out of the window, the captain saw it clear as day. All of the dialogue I've read for this story has came directly from a 500-plus page transcript released by the National Transportation Safety Board. The transcripts were made from the El Faro's Voyage data recorder, which is basically a black box for ships. It picked up more than 26 hours of audio through microphones embedded in the bridge, where the captain and his crewmates were essentially fighting for their lives. When the captain peered out of the window through the rain beating down, he saw the ship's bow slip just beneath the waves. Here was what the black box captured on the bridge. "Bow is down! Bow is down!" Davidson shouted over the ship's intercom. "Get into your rafts. Throw all your rafts into the water. Everybody get off the ship. Stay together," he yelled. Helmsman Frank Ham was unable to move due to the extreme angle the ship was listing at. Cap, he said. "We gotta move. You gotta get up. You gotta snap out of it and we gotta get out," Davidson said urgently. "Help me," Ham pleaded. "You gotta get to safety," Davidson barked. It appeared that Ham still couldn't move. He was a larger man due to his diabetes, and moving around was difficult at times. The ship continued to roll over, heading for the bottom of the ocean. Don't panic. Work your way up here," Davidson said. "I can't," Ham yelled. "Don't freeze up. Come on." The captain then started yelling, seemingly searching for the life preservers on the bridge. He then told Ham to follow him. "I can't. My feet are slipping. I'm going down," Ham exclaimed. "You're not going down. Come on." "I need a ladder," said Ham. "We don't have a ladder." "A line." "I don't have a line." "You gonna leave me?" Ham said. "I'm not leaving you. Let's go," the captain said loudly. "I need someone to help me," Ham said again. "I'm the only one here," the captain replied. "I'm a goner," Ham shouted. "No, you're not." The recording transcript noted at this moment in the recording at 7:39:32, a sound of low-frequency rumble was building up until the end of the recording. "It's time to come this way," Davidson shouted. At 7:39:41, there was some inaudible screaming that was cut off by the termination of the recording. That was it. The line went dead at 7:39 on October 1st of 2015. The El Faro had fell below the warm Caribbean waters. A few hours after the ship went down, an aircraft from the U.S. Air Force tried locating the ship from its last transmitted position. Conditions were still the same from when the ship had went down, so visibility was terrible. Nothing of the El Faro turned up. The next day, the U.S. Coast Guard sent a couple of aircraft to begin a dedicated search of the immediate area. They noted the sheer violence of the hurricane. Winds in excess of 115 miles, waves of up to 40 feet, and their visibility was less than 1 nautical mile. Somehow, they managed to recover a couple of life rings in a debris field that bore the inscription El Faro. On October 4th, as the hurricane made its way to the northeast away from the search area, the Coast Guard sent out 3 aircraft and a helicopter to take advantage of the clear skies and calm seas. After 2 fueling stops and 11 hours of searching, nothing of value turned up. The next morning, the search parties resumed yet again. An empty lifeboat floating vertically, with only its bow sticking out above the surface, was recovered. The boat had been fatally damaged, having been crushed on both sides. Still, survivors from the wreck had yet to show up, but searchers were not giving up. A glimmer of orange caught the eye of one of the rescuers. He immediately recognized it as a safety immersion suit. They quickly lowered a rescue swimmer down into the water to investigate it further. The swimmer noted that there were indeed human remains inside, but were in such an advanced state of decomposition he could not even identify the gender. He noted the head was swelled to about 3 times the normal size. Before they were able to recover the remains, the helicopter was called off to investigate a report of another immersion suit with a possible survivor inside. The rescue swimmer dropped a beacon marker by the first body and was raised up to investigate the second. Unfortunately, though, they were unable to locate the other body. When they went back to recover the previous remains, the marker beacon had failed. After 7 days of searching and covering over 180,000 square miles of sea, no survivors or remains of the 33-man crew from the El Faro were successfully recovered. The only thing the vessel left behind were 3 empty immersion suits, 3 life rings, a couple of oil slicks, and over a 20-mile stretch of floating dolls from a shipping container that had been busted open. They elected to end the search for survivors, but the investigation for piecing together the devastating chain of events was just getting underway. The most important piece of understanding this complex puzzle was laying with the ship. They needed to go get it. They discovered the El Faro 15,400 feet below the water's surface, resting upright on a sandy plain. They sent down ROVs to photograph the wreck and search for the black box, which was essentially a tiny 2.5-inch circuit board. Miraculously, they were able to locate and recover it. This tiny piece of technology allowed everyone to piece the final events of this story back together. On December 12th of 2017, the NTSB released their findings. In it, they criticized a few things. 1. The captain's decision to advance into the oncoming storm, despite numerous calls from the crew to alter course, and noted he had relied on outdated weather information from a commercial service, the BVS. 2. The Coast Guard's practices of grandfathering in vessels exempting them from using closed lifeboats. The obsolescent lifeboats were not properly maintained. They were not launched, and in all probability, they would not have offered useful shelter. 3. They noted the owner's failure to maintain a deteriorating vessel. In their final statement, they determined, quote, the probable cause of the sinking of El Faro and the subsequent loss of life was the captain's insufficient action to avoid Hurricane Joaquin, his failure to use the most current weather information, and his late decision to muster the crew. Contributing to the sinking was ineffective bridge resource management on board El Faro, which included the captain's failure to adequately consider officers' suggestions. Also contributing to the sinking was the inadequacy of both TOT's oversight and its safety management system. Further contributing factors were flooding in a cargo hold from an undetected open watertight scuttle and damaged seawater piping, loss of propulsion due to low lube oil pressure to the main engine resulting from a sustained list, and subsequent downflooding through unsecured ventilation closures to the cargo holds. Also contributing was the lack of an approved damage control plan. Contributing to the loss of life was the lack of appropriate survival craft for the conditions." End quote. This has been one of the most harrowing stories I've ever researched and written. Combing through the transcripts and reading the words of these people in dire circumstances have really been tough. As always, I will link the source material as well as the transcript on my website for you to take a look at if you feel inclined to do so. If you ever find yourself in Jacksonville, Florida, just beneath the Dames Point Bridge sits the El Faro Memorial Park. In the center of the park stands a bronze statue in the shape of a lighthouse. The inscription reads, quote, "In our hearts forever," along with the 33 names of the crew members that were lost at sea. Their relatives will never forget what happened in the Atlantic on that day. And now that I've read this story, I know I won't either. This episode was written and produced by me, Bradley Hall. If you enjoyed this story, as we explored the story of the El Faro and her fatal sinking, please be sure to like, rate, and subscribe. My website and socials are linked in the show notes for you to leave feedback and recommendations. Full transcripts along with the source material used for this episode can be found on my website. Thanks for listening.